So whether it's your first jump or your 50th jump, it's really not over until your feet are on the ground. One of the most critical skills that you can learn as a newer skydiver is how can I be a safe pilot in the air and how can I have predictable landing patterns? This video is going to break down exactly what you need to know so that you can be a safe and proficient canopy pilot. To help you master these skills, we've created a free download guide for you. You can get that in the link in the description box below. And with this guide, you're going to be able to practice how to read windsocks first and then how to go about drawing landing patterns. So remember to grab the link in the description box below and let's get started. Okay, let's start with the basics, understanding the wind. Because as a canopy pilot, the wind can be your best friend and it's always going to be your biggest variable. So you don't have to be at a drop zone to be able to see the wind in action. Just think about a flag on a flagpole, because that's probably one of the most common wind indicators that you're going to see on a regular basis. So let's look at this flag. Look at the way it's flying and think about where the wind must be coming from. Hopefully, you'll agree that the winds are coming from where the arrow here on the graphic is pointing. So the wind is blowing this way, and that's why the flag is the way it is. So we're going to move on now to a more commonly seen wind indicator at the airports, and that is the windsock. So windsocks are fantastic because they are going to be telling you two pieces of information that you're going to want, both the wind speed as well as the direction. Just like the flag, the windsock is going to be pointing downwind. So the wind is coming from the fatter open end, so this area here, and it is blowing towards the skinny pointed end. So if you just think about how the wind must be moving through here for it to be standing out like this, the wind is, again, it is coming from the fatter end and blowing this way. So I mentioned that windsocks will show us direction as well as speed. So when we look at this graphic on the very left, the windsock that is hanging limply, that is telling us that we've got pretty light winds. In the middle, where it's partially inflated, that's telling us that the winds are moderate. And when it's fully extended, that's telling us that there is a strong wind. Now, not all windsocks are like this orange and white stripes that we have here. Some are just fully orange. So don't pay too much attention to the stripes, but just in general, how far out it is extended gives you an idea of what the wind speed is. So if it is fully extended, that is telling you that it's a pretty strong wind speed. And that's going to be useful information because it's going to tell us about how much ground that we're going to cover. And we're going to come back to this idea in just a moment. So again, quick review. Windsocks or flags, right? They're going to show us wind direction. And in the case of the windsock, the wind is entering from the fatter end and it's blowing towards the skinny end. So the wind is, in all of these pictures, the wind is coming from the left here. Windsocks will also tell us speed, right? Based on how far out the windsock is extended. So here, very light winds, this one is moderate, and this one is a stronger wind. Okay, so now let's move into airspeed and ground speed. So this can sometimes be a confusing topic for new canopy pilots, what the difference is. If we think about this, actually let's relate it to something that we have seen before, moving walkways, right? If you're walking at a certain speed and you get onto a moving walkway and you're going in the direction that it is going, are you walking faster or slower than you normally would? Well, if somebody is out there watching you, they're going to think that you're walking faster than normal. And it's going to be the same thing when we think about our parachute. Our parachute is flying at a certain forward speed. So here in this graphic, I've got the forward speed is 26 miles per hour, which is pretty appropriate for a student canopy. So your parachute is moving forward at 26 miles per hour. And now we're going to factor in the wind. So if we have a wind that day that is blowing at 10 miles per hour, and we're traveling in the same direction as the wind is blowing, what is going to be our ground speed going across the ground? So just like that moving walkway, because we are going with the wind, right, we actually just add these. So we would be traveling across the ground at 36 miles per hour. Now, what happens if you were to turn around and fly into the wind? And that's what this graphic is asking. So we've just, same wind, airspeed is not going to change on your parachute. We're just now pointed and facing and trying to go into the wind. Just like if you're trying to run on a really windy day, right? When you're trying to run into the wind, you'll find that you're slower. Same thing happens here. Our ground speed, we're actually going to subtract the wind speed from our airspeed, and that gives us ground speed. So 26 minus 10, 16 miles per hour. We're going to be moving slower across the ground when we're going into the wind. Landing patterns. Well, why do we even bother with landing patterns, right? Why can't we just point our parachute at the target as soon as we open up and make sure everything is fine and just head towards that? So to understand that, let's take a moment to think about what airplanes do. When you watch an airplane come in to land in an airport, you notice that they don't just dive straight down from whichever direction that they're coming from. They're actually going to fly a very specific rectangular pattern. And why is that? Right? Well, there's a few key reasons that airplanes do that. And number one, it's safety, because it ensures that there is a predictable traffic flow. Everybody knows what to expect. It allows pilots to bleed off their altitude in a controlled manner. It hopefully will keep them clear of buildings, trees, and other aircraft, whatever obstacles might be around. And finally, it's going to set them up so that they're favoring landing in the direction that the wind is coming from. So they want to favor landing into the wind. Why is that? Think about that for a moment. Hopefully you said it's because if they land into the wind, their ground speed is going to be slower than it otherwise would be. And as skydivers, we might be flying a smaller aircraft, right? Our parachute is smaller, but the principles are going to be exactly the same. So our landing pattern is to help control our flight path, to safely manage our altitude and positioning, and ensure that we land, hopefully in an obstacle-free area, in a direction that favors going into the wind, if possible. The landing patterns are made up of what we call 3 legs. There's a downwind, a base, and a final leg. We also can talk about a left-hand pattern versus a right-hand pattern. And all of this means is that whatever turn, 90-degree turns that you're going to make from one leg to the next, if it's a left-hand pattern, all those turns are going to be to the left. If it's a right-hand pattern, all of those turns are going to be to the right. And that's what that means. To make this simpler in the beginning, we're only going to be considering left-hand patterns for the moment. How do we find or figure out what our landing pattern should be? So the first step is to locate where we want to land and determine what the wind direction is. That's why I have this target here, as well as our windsock telling us that the wind, hopefully you'll say, is coming from this direction, right? We can also see that the wind is fairly light. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. What we're going to do is we're actually going to work this backwards. So once I know my target and I know where the wind is coming from, right? Remember that we said that we are going to try to favor the direction that, to face in the direction that the wind is coming in. So when we're coming in for landing. So that's going to look like this for our final leg. It's going to begin at approximately 300 feet of altitude. So now think for a moment which direction you must be coming from so that you can turn left. Because remember I said we're only going to be dealing with left-hand patterns for the moment. So our next step is to draw our base leg, which is going to begin at approximately 600 feet. So from 600 to 300 feet, we are on our base leg, and you'll notice that we will be flying across the wind or crosswind. So the third leg of our landing pattern and how it all begins is our downwind leg. So that's going to begin at roughly 900 feet. And you're going to see the reason why it's called a downwind leg is because we are going downwind. We are going with the wind on this leg. So those are the 3 legs of our landing pattern, but we're not quite done yet. So on this first jump, if you remember, you'll be deploying your parachute at approximately 5,500 feet. The question is, what am I doing from once I've done checking out all of my canopy, doing my controllability check, making sure that everything is fine. Let's say that we're at roughly 4,500 feet. So what am I going to do from 4,500 feet down to around 900 feet before I start my landing pattern? The answer to that is that we are going to be staying in what we call our holding area. So what you'll see is your holding area should always be upwind of your target. Because if you think about this, right, especially if the wind is a little bit stronger that day, if you were to go and fly yourself downwind of your target, then when you turn around to try to face into the wind and fight your way back, it might be difficult to do that, and you may never get there. But if we stay upwind of our target, right, we're upwind based on what the wind direction is showing us right here, then it's going to be much easier to monitor our position as well as our altitude to make sure that we are about where we need to be at approximately 900 feet. So your holding area should always be upwind of your target. So let's just take a moment to practice. Here we've got our target and we've got our wind speed, our windsock, and that would indicate both the speed. So notice here, this is showing you that the winds are actually stronger than what they were on the first or on the previous example. And then notice which direction the wind is coming from. It's a little bit difficult to draw in a 3D manner. So from here on out, I'm just going to be doing a 2D version of what your landing pattern might look like. So think about which direction you want your final leg to be facing. And again, we'd like to favor into the wind. On our practice example here, we don't have any obstacles that we have to think about, so we can land exactly into the wind, and that would look like this. If I want to do a left-hand pattern, which way must I approach my final leg? I can either come from this direction, right? Or I can come from this direction, because I'm going to be doing a 90-degree turn onto my final. Hopefully you see that by coming from this direction, right, you will make a left 90-degree turn onto final. So what does this mean for our downwind? How this all starts is that we must have been coming from this direction if we were to be doing a left-hand pattern. And the last thing that we have to think about is where should our holding area be? And again, that is going to be upwind of our target. So now let's talk about what would a right-hand pattern look like, right? So same thing for final. We're going to be coming in, favoring the direction that the wind is coming from. But to be doing a right-hand pattern, I'm going to be making a right 90-degree turn from my base onto final, and how I'm going to be doing that is if I approach from the opposite direction. And then the downwind leg looks very similar as well, and our holding area is still going to be upwind of our target. So you can see they're just mirror images of each other. A left-hand pattern and a right-hand pattern look very similar. It's just a reflection. We'll just throw in now the altitude. So again, downwind leg starts at around 900 feet. You're going to turn onto base at approximately 600 feet. And once you get to around 300 feet, that's when you're going to make your final turn onto the final leg. One thing that I haven't really explained yet is why the holding area is the shape of a cone. Some people like to draw this as a circle or as a rectangle. I like to think of it more as this cone or funnel shape, just to remind you that when you're up higher, you can probably be playing around more, but you need to think about funneling yourself into the area that you want to start your landing pattern by 900 feet or so. Let's just briefly talk about how wind speed affects things. So this is going to be a little bit more advanced topic. You'll probably be more in tune with after you have a few jumps. So here are two different landing patterns. And I want you to just think for a moment which one, actually just completely disregard this windsock, right? It's just gonna, let's just say this windsock is only showing us direction, so not speed. So which one of these landing patterns do you think would be for when winds are stronger? So think about what the difference in your ground speed would be for lighter winds versus stronger winds and how that might translate and show up into your landing pattern. So stronger winds are actually going to be, a landing pattern is going to look more like this, right? And that's because on your downwind leg, you're going to go with the wind and you're going to be covering ground a lot faster. And when you turn into the wind, if it's a stronger wind, your final leg is going to be a lot shorter because as soon as you turn into the wind, it is not going to allow you to progress as far as if it's a lighter wind day. So in blue, we have a landing pattern that would be good for lighter winds And in yellow, we're showing a little bit more moderate to stronger winds. Again, this is a little bit more of an advanced topic, so after you have a few jumps under your belt, then it's going to make more sense. Just thought I'd introduce that idea to you. And I don't have them written here, but again, the altitudes at which you are starting your pattern and making these turns are still going to be the same no matter what the wind speed are. So it'd still be that 900, 600, and 300. We've only talked about landing patterns in general. Before each and every jump, your instructor should take you to an aerial photo to identify where you are going to be landing, what the winds are currently doing, and what a good landing pattern might look like. So let's talk about what happens below 300 feet. We have just made our last turn. We are on the final leg of our landing pattern, and we want to fly straight, only giving small corrections as needed to keep flying the line that we want and to avoid any obstacles that might be in our path, if we can. Sometimes people feel like the parachute feels like it's flying faster, but your airspeed is the same, as we've seen. A lot of times as you get closer to the ground and you have a greater reference points, it just looks like it's flying faster. So we want to look at it about a 45-degree angle because that's the angle that roughly your parachute is coming down at. If we look straight down, we're going to think we're a lot closer to the ground than we really are. We want to have our feet and knees together, and typically the harnesses for on the student rigs, they tend to encourage people to spread their legs a little bit, but we want to be prepared for a PLF. That stands for parachute landing fall. And to do so, we need to have our feet and knees together. So you really got to think about, put my feet and knees together. We're going to begin to flare our parachute at around 15 feet. So that's that 3-second, bringing your hands down past your 3 rings and all the way down to the center of your pelvis. Flare, flare, flare. Should be about that speed. If we start to flare too high, we should just hold the toggles when we realize that we're too high if we haven't finished completely, and then finish it once we get to an appropriate height. If you've already fully flared, you're just going to hold it and really be ready for that PLF. If we let the toggles up after we've already begun to flare, that's going to cause the parachute to dive. So we're just going to take a moment to talk about why that is. And that has to do with what is called the parachute flight cycle. So trying to relate this back to what we've already known, if we're on a swing, or if you suddenly stop giving any sort of input, does that swing immediately come back to rest? The answer, of course, is no, it doesn't. It takes a few oscillations for it to come back to rest, and that's the same thing with the parachute. So parachutes, after any sort of input, they go through this flight cycle. And that's why flaring is like going down a one-way street. You can stop at any point, but you can't go back. So that's why we were saying that if we realize that we have begun to flare too high and we haven't finished yet, maybe we're only down to our shoulders, we can arrest the flare for a moment or two until we get to a more appropriate height, and then we can finish the flare. However, if we've already flared completely, we cannot go back up. So we're just going to be ready to PLF. So let's review. When will your equipment be checked? Hopefully it said you get 3 equipment checks, 1 before you put the gear on, 1 before you get onto the aircraft, and another one just a few minutes before exiting the aircraft. What is the name of the connection between the pilot chute and the deployment bag? How does the pilot chute connect to the deployment bag? And this is a very common one for everybody to forget. It's actually called the bridle, or more specifically, the pilot chute bridle. What is your pull sequence? So the pull sequence begins with the wave off, and then we're going to arch more, reach back, find our deployment handle, and throw it out. So wave off, arch, reach, throw. Some people say pull, so whichever. When does the pull sequence start? On an AFF jump, one of the first AFF jumps, you're going to be initiating the pull sequence at roughly 5,500 feet. Why do we perform a landing pattern? Number one reason is safety, so that we are predictable to everyone. And another reason is so it's a way to methodically bleed off the altitude as we're coming in for a landing. Last thing that we're going to talk about today, and to wrap everything up, is what are our landing priorities. So remember, you had 3 pull priorities. Those were to pull at the correct altitude, and pull at the correct altitude while being stable. You also are going to have 3 landing priorities. So when you're coming in for landing, what should you think about? Number 1 is we want to land with our wing level, flying straight. What does wing level mean? That means that your parachute should be above you, and the only time that it's not really above you is when you're making some sort of input, so like a turn. So this really means no low turns. So land with a level wing, flying pretty much straight. Now, you can give slight corrections as needed. Second priority is to land in a clear and open area, so free of obstacles. And our lowest priority is going to be flaring to at least half brakes and being prepared to PLF. The most important thing is to land with a wing level, flying relatively straight. So I hope you've enjoyed this Skydiving 101 topics that we have done. There are still several other topics that you should cover before making a first jump. Things that I have not covered are how to do the PLF. That's better seen in person and practiced in person. And also, big one, emergency procedures. Every drop zone has their own way that they'd like to do emergency procedure training. So you should just wait until you find out where the place that you want to be jumping, what they do. Remember to download your free landing pattern guide so that you can put the concepts covered in this video into practice. If you found this information valuable and believe that more skydivers could benefit from mastering their patterns, please like this video and consider subscribing to the Skydive Fundamentals channel.